I love how most young men in our generation grew up hearing in public school that there's 76 genders, but all of us kind of independently realized it's fake. Hey guys, welcome back to KingdomCraft, where we build churches in Minecraft while talking about Christianity. Today I'm going to keep working on this church that I started at the top of my little oasis here, while I talk about something not directly related to Christianity, but kind of related. It's how I went from liberal to conservative, how I went from progressive to more traditional. And this is not the same as my conversion to Christianity. It's not the same as my conversion from secular to Christian, but it is sort of intertwined. But the thing is, my conversion to Christianity was instantaneous. It was one night I realized Christianity is true, I realized it all made sense, and from that point on, I was a passionate Christian with a passion to serve God and spread the knowledge of God. Whereas my conversion from leftist to Christian, and my conversion from leftist to conservative was a lot more gradual. It took time, and it was in 4 different stages. So the first stage was actually before my conversion to Christianity. The first stage of my conversion from liberal to conservative sort of just weakened my faith in the leftist religion, you could say. And the rest of the stages, you could say, of my conversion from liberal to conservative were after my conversion to Christianity, as I started to question the things that I was taught growing up, the leftist presuppositions that I was sort of raised with just based on the culture in, like, New York, where I grew up. So, leftism really is a religion, and leftism was my religion at the time. It's what gave me meaning and purpose in life. It was, left-wing politics, and leftism is a religion for so many people. That is why they have such cancel culture for different words that you're not allowed to use. That's why they regulate speech so much. They regulate speech the same way like a religious fundamentalist would have blasphemy laws. Saying an offensive joke to a leftist is like blaspheming their god. Generally, it's okay to joke about anything except that which is sacred, and social justice is sacred to the left. So, according to leftism, it's okay to, joke about God. It's okay to blaspheme God, but it is not okay to blaspheme the God of social justice, according to them. So, that proves that basically every human worships something. The human heart needs to worship something, and if it is not God, if it is not the God of the Bible, it will be something else, whether it's money, power, or in the left's case, their social justice utopia. So saying something offensive is like blaspheming that to them. But you get the point. Leftism is a religion for many people. It was for me. I was like a radical Bernie Sanders supporter. I cared a lot more about politics back when I was a leftist than I do now. Now I mostly just care about religion. I'm a bit indifferent to, actual politics. I care about cultural issues, abortion and stuff that are connected to politics. But in terms of, actual elections, I do not care. I think we need to fix the culture. But back then, I cared a lot. So for a while, I was just a teenager, I called myself a socialist. It wasn't because I had actually read any Marx or Lenin or anything like that. I called myself a socialist the same reason a lot of young teenage boys do. It was because I liked the Soviet anthem. But I was very progressive. And when, Trump won the election, for example, I had such existential terror because if your god is social justice, then when something happens that threatens social justice, which I thought was, that election at the time, it gives you quite an existential crisis. So, I was like that for a while, and I would like to tell you that I began questioning leftism once I converted to Christianity. I would like to tell you that the first time I opened a Bible, I saw the truth, and I saw that I was mistaken in being a leftist. That's what I would tell you if I wanted to tell a good, powerful story, but that's not the truth. The thing that got me to question leftism was the same exact thing that causes basically every young man to question leftism. It was seeing how cringe the LGBT stuff was, how cringe the transgender identity stuff was. And it was watching SJW cringe compilations on YouTube and listening to Ben Shapiro destroys liberals and feminists. It was that sort of stuff, which nowadays I'm kind of embarrassed by. But I listened to this YouTuber like Hunter Avalone, who's actually very liberal now, and he reacted to one of my videos. But I was listening to him back when he made fun of all that stuff. So my first stage in being conservative, my first push towards conservatism, wasn't really much of a change in my central ideology. It was just a frustration with the whole 76 gender stuff. Like, I was still supportive of LGBT in general, in theory at least, but I was like, maybe there's not really 76 genders. That sounds kind of weird. Maybe, I don't know, color gender is not a real gender. Maybe, transgender identity is not exactly a thing, even though I totally support the LGB and LGBT. I started thinking like that. And I was known as, like, the most liberal person in my friend group. Like, my other friends were liberals, too. But I was known as, like, that super crazy, politically liberal one. So, when I first started to express doubts about that, they were shocked, and they were really angry at me. And I was surprised. I was like, wait, we're liberals. Aren't liberals supposed to be tolerant? Aren't you supposed to, like, tolerate different opinions or whatever? And that was just the beginning. Little did I know that that was, the exact opposite of what the left is. One of the first stages in deconstructing leftism is realizing that, no, they are not actually tolerant. They are only tolerant of things they like, and that's not tolerance. It's like, they're not tolerant of LGBT, they like it. It doesn't make sense to be tolerant of something you already like. That's like me saying I'm tolerant of Christianity. No, I'm not tolerant of it. I like it. I promote it. Tolerance would be like tolerating something you disagree with, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I could say that I tolerate Roman Catholicism because I allow lots of Roman Catholics to build a bunch of things on my Minecraft server. Ooh, there's an ocelot over there. I tolerate Catholicism, even though I'm not Catholic. But still, I like Catholicism because it's Christianity. But you cannot tolerate something that you are actively pushing for. So, one of the first things I realized is the left is not tolerant. So my first wave of conservatism didn't actually change any fundamental ideas that I had. It did two things. Number one, it made me question leftism. It made me question the integrity and the character of leftists. Like, I used to respect them, but now I saw them as kind of mean. And another thing was, it made me realize that their arguments aren't exactly based on logic and reasoning, because when I tried to reason with them, I was just shut down and given, like, a bunch of emotional arguments instead, which are not arguments, it's just conversation enders. So I wasn't any sort of intellectual kind of conservative. I wasn't listening to anything, that intellectually rich. It was mostly just reactionary stuff. As powerful as SJW cringe compilations were in 2017 for radicalizing some young men, it's not the most intellectually substantive thing, but I think it's not even trying to be. I think there still is a place for that in small doses to just show how absurd the whole thing is. But once your faith is shaken, it's important to grab hold of something with actual substance, like Christianity. So that was in, like, the winter of 2017, the beginning of 2017. And in summer 2017, I went to that summer camp where I converted to Christianity. I've shared my more extended testimony in other places. I don't think I would have been quite as open to being evangelized to by those conservative Christians if my faith in leftism hadn't been shaken. So my first wave of becoming conservative was important in that it got me to distrust liberalism and leftism. I mean, I know those are not the same thing, but at that time I thought of them as the same thing, so I'm going to talk about them univocally. I'm going to use univocity of those terms. I'm going to talk about them as if they're the same for the sake of this video, because you guys know what I mean. So, if my faith in liberalism had not been shaken, I wouldn't have been open-minded to conservative Christians. But it was shaken, so I was open-minded to listening to conservative Christians, and I did. I ended up converting to Christianity that summer. And I didn't immediately change any political opinions I had that summer, because, my conversion to Christianity was not the same as my conversion to conservatism. Christianity is not identical with conservatism, and it's important to realize that. It's like, even if you're like a conservative young man, even if you're listening to like Jordan Peterson or other conservative political philosophers, what really matters most in the end is, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? Are you going to church? Are you active in your faith in Christ? Do you actually want to participate in the Christian faith? Or is it just some vague thing that you generally support? We shouldn't just be Christian because it's based in trad and conservative. Either it's true or it's not. If it's not true, we shouldn't be Christian. If it is true, we should, and it is true, so we should. But That summer, I still identified as a socialist, even a communist sometimes. I was really cringe. I had, like, the most cringe aspects of the left and the right. I called myself a communist, but also was like, oh, I'm not one of those, like, silly SJW communists. So at that time, I was, like, socially very anti-woke. I didn't like any of that woke stuff. But economically, I still liked a lot of the left-wing stuff. I still called myself socialist. I still listened to the Soviet anthem, because, you know, I was an edgy teenager. And I still liked all that. I still would identify politically as a Democrat, even though I question a lot of the attitude and behavior of my fellow Democrats in New York. Now, of course, the place where I converted wasn't New York. It was when I went to that Christian camp in the Midwest. My pilgrimage to the Midwest was very impactful, and to this day, the Midwest has always been the Holy Land for me. The Midwest does have the most nice, amazing people you'll ever meet, even if their architecture often sucks. The Midwest is the Holy Land. The Holy Land isn't Palestine, guys. It's Ohio. Anyway, so I came back to New York. I saw that my New York friends were a lot less nice than those Midwesterners I was exposed to, but I was still trying to be a champion of liberalism. That was until my friends completely betrayed me. Like, they were my friends for a long time, and they still kept kind of being my friends after hearing that I was starting to question leftism. But then I converted to Christianity, and they got really suspicious. My friends were mostly Jewish and atheist. So one of my Jewish friends, after I got back from summer camp, made a joke blaspheming Christianity, and I got offended, and she was like, wait, I can't say that? And I was like, no, I'm Christian now. She was like, I thought you were Jewish, because, you know, I have a Jewish last name and Jewish heritage, even though I've never been part of the Jewish faith. But I was like, no, I am Christian, and that's really offensive. So she was like, all right. But behind my back, my friends were like, oh, Richard, because that's my name, Richard is a Christian now, and he's going to become like a super homophobic, bigoted Christian and all that. And at that time, I didn't think I was. At that time, I tried to tell them, like, no, being Christian to me just means being nice to people. And they're like, okay, but we're watching you. So then the second I started to actually argue with them about LGBT stuff, about transgender stuff, I was immediately canceled. And people who I thought were my friends, people who I thought I could trust, turned on me in like an instant. And because they're New Yorkers and because they were jerks, they didn't even tell me they turned on me. They still pretended to be my friends for a little while. And I gradually realized throughout the school year, this was in high school, that they had been trash-talking me behind my back, and that's why I started to notice them getting less and less friendly with me. So that is what triggered my second wave of being conservative. So I just abandoned all liberalism entirely. At least I thought so. So in the summer 2018, I became sort of like a Ben Shapiro, Dennis Prager type conservative. At that point, I was just knee-jerk anti-liberal. So that's when I finally stopped calling myself like a socialist or a communist or whatever. And I was listening to like Dennis Prager's fireside chats. Now, he says a lot of very cringe things, Dennis Prager, but some of his fireside chats, you gotta say, they admit they are kind of interesting. He does share things that are very wise, at least compared to the public school nonsense I was fed my entire life. So at that time, it was helpful for me, but I wasn't really listening to religious content. I was just listening to, like, right-wing political content, and that wasn't the most spiritually healthy for me. I began to really doubt my faith, because the first year of being Christian, it was really fun. But the second year of being Christian, I started to have serious intellectual doubts about the faith, which I would share, but I recently also made a video about how to deal with doubts. So if you're struggling with that, you should watch that video. Now, some people said it helped them. But, I was listening to people like Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager for advice about faith, and, you know, they're not Christian, they're Jewish, it's a different religion, so I probably shouldn't have done that. So yeah, my type of conservatism back then was, I love my guns and my freedoms and the state of Israel that I will die for before I even die for my own country. That was my type of conservatism back then. Again, very cringe. You'll notice this is mostly just a story of all the different ways in which I've been cringe and fitting every single young male stereotype. I basically speed ran every young male stereotype on the left and the right. But yes, I was that type of conservative for a while, but I still wasn't that socially conservative. Like, I still, in theory, supported gay rights. I still supported gay marriage in theory. I still supported gay marriage in the church even, because I wasn't reading the Bible or anything. I was just listening to conservative political content. And, you know, I saw certain videos, like on PragerU, about, you know, gay conservatives. So I thought, yeah, why can't there be gay conservatives if they love freedom or whatever? So, yeah, my second wave of conservatism was mostly just economic and political conservatism, but still, I was unknowingly quite progressive in other ways just because of the cultural pressure. That's why I say these days Democrat versus Republican doesn't matter, because it used to be both sides were, against LGBT, and then the cultural tides changed, so then both sides now are for LGBT. So what does that mean? It means it really doesn't matter in the end whether Democrats or Republicans win, if both sides will just follow the culture. So that's why you really need to just change the culture, and then you will improve both political parties. Like, once we realize what a woman is, then we can argue about taxes. That's the way I see it. That's why I don't care about politics anymore. I care about the culture, and I care about religion. Anyway. So I was like that for a while. I was sort of like a Republican-type conservative. But I told you I had a lot of doubts about my faith, and I saw answers to it, and I found answers in Calvinism and Reformed theology. I began listening to Tim Keller. Tim Keller was massively helpful for my faith. So my third wave of conservatism after that was much less about politics and much more finally about theology. This was like the biggest intersection between my conservatism and my Christianity, because it was in this stage that I finally understood the Bible. I finally started reading the Bible. And once I did, I read what it said about, abortion and homosexuality. And I realized that while we're supposed to love all people, Jesus said to love your enemies, that doesn't mean we affirm all people. And yes, Jesus did eat with the outcasts, he did eat with prostitutes and stuff, but his goal in doing that was not inclusion, it was redemption. When asked why he was doing that by the Pharisees, he said it's the sick who need a doctor, but if you call sexually immoral people sick, the left will freak out at you. So whenever they say, oh, Jesus was accepting because he ate with prostitutes, just bring that up to them. So it was hard for me. Like a lot of times when I tell people I have a traditional Christian view of sexuality, and that includes homosexuality, they'll be like, oh, you're just some evangelical bigot who grew up in some evangelical bubble. I'm like, guys, I did not grow up evangelical. I've never been evangelical. I grew up very much supporting all this. I grew up with lots of gay friends and family. It was a very hard decision to make, and I had a lot of uncomfortable conversations in the process of making that. But I eventually realized it's what the Bible says. The Bible is the Word of God. And I know a lot of people around me were telling me the Bible's not the Word of God, and I should just trust the mainstream culture. But I saw the fruits of the mainstream culture around me. Everyone was miserable. And I began seeing many, many examples of people, particularly young women, becoming much more depressed after getting sucked down the LGBTQ rabbit hole and also the social justice rabbit hole. So I began to see the fruits of the culture around me, and I started to really distrust it. So I put 100% of my trust in the Bible instead. I mean, at least I said I did. In reality, I never trust the Bible. I never trust God as much as I should. But that's what I said. And I trusted the Bible enough at that point to realize the Bible does teach homosexuality is a sin. And I had to admit that. And it was very, very unpopular. And it put the nail in the coffin of my social life. So at that point, I was completely against LGBT and abortion. And that didn't just cause trouble at school. That caused trouble at church. Because, as you guys know, I'm in a progressive-leaning denomination, the PCUSA. And for those of you saying, why don't I just leave? Well, I don't believe in running away. I believe that the reason the churches and schools and everything got this progressive is because conservatives keep running away from things. I think if conservatives want to see any positive cultural change, we need to stop running away from mainstream churches and mainstream universities and mainstream cities and begin to go back to those spaces and have an influence once again. We need to not seek out our own safe spaces. In those SJW cringe compilations, I hear a lot about liberals needing safe spaces, but in practice, it's actually conservatives who often do. Conservatives are often too scared to fight for the truth. So, yeah, that's why I remained in the PCUSA, my progressive-leaning denomination. But it was hard being there, and I got yelled at by progressive pastors in my own denomination for being pro-life. One of them said unborn children are parasites. Now, I would say that person should never be a pastor if she called unborn children parasites, but it's what she did, and that is really concerning. That's an understatement, of course. That's completely wicked, and she should be excommunicated from the church for saying that. She also called Tim Keller a fundamentalist because, he doesn't support women's ordination because he's in the PCA. But, these people don't believe in God, basically. They believe the resurrection of Jesus is just a metaphor. So I'll take all of their spiritual advice with a grain of salt. Or actually just not at all. So yeah, that was the third wave of my shift towards conservatism. At that point, I was conservative enough to impress my fiance when I met her on Instagram. We were both doing digital evangelism, and we just crossed paths with each other and fell in love. And I have the whole Calvinist love story is available on YouTube if you want to hear the details. But basically, I was pretty conservative back then. I was still in favor of, women's ordination. I was still in favor of women pastors in theory, and she actually changed my mind on that. So anytime someone says I'm sexist for not supporting women's ordination, I just bring that detail up. I bring up why I no longer support women's ordination. It's because I was simping. No, it's not. It's because she showed me that my biblical arguments for women's ordination were complete mental gymnastics, and I was just coping hard. She didn't use those exact words, but you get the gist. So what was my fourth wave of conservatism? So, part of it was just learning to not accept women's ordination, but also I met my fiance in the midst of the big pandemic, the big lockdown, and that's when, during the 2020 election, when all the BLM protests were going on, and I saw so many progressives in my hometown, just on social media, supporting violence. I mean, think what you want politically, but supporting political violence is not cool. And so many on the left were supporting this violence. It's like, left-wing violence is considered just free speech, but right-wing free speech is considered political violence. So that's when I started to really deeply examine where the culture went wrong. That's when I first developed the seeds of my Reconquista ideology, that we need to retake the culture on a deep structural level. And that's when I started to care about more than just politics, and more than just, theological rules, but also about the spiritual health of the culture. Another reason I ended up becoming like this is because I'm a musician. I'm a classical musician. I was taking a composition class, and I was constantly told in this composition class to appreciate modern art and modern classical music. And I began to realize that modern art and modern classical music is absolutely disgusting. So I learned about cultural Marxism and critical theory and the Frankfurt School, and I realized why everything is the way it is. Basically, all the issues that we're facing in modernity can be traced back to, philosophy, certain philosophical schools. I mean, you could really trace it back to Immanuel Kant or even Descartes, and back to the French Revolution, at least, if you want to go back far enough. But the modern iteration of all this is really with the Frankfurt School, like Antonio Gramsci and Herbert Marcuse, all those Frankfurt School guys. And basically, the essence of cultural Marxism is trying to deconstruct everything, not trying to build everything up. How does this apply to modern art? Well, art used to be about living up to an objective beauty standard. But nowadays, art, meaning modern art, is really just about deconstructing the beauty standard. It's not about living up to anything. It's just about challenging things. So modernism and the critical theory doesn't build up, it just tears down. So that's how it applies to art and music, and you can see the fruits of that. Now, how does this apply to theology? Everything began to make sense to me. In my progressive church, I noticed that the progressive pastors wouldn't ever preach on truth from the Bible. They would never read a Bible passage and say, here's what this means. They would never talk about heaven or God or the resurrection or salvation as something that's actually real. All they would do is try and challenge traditional assumptions. All that progressive pastors would ever do is read a Bible passage and say, now traditionally Christians thought this, but actually, and they would say something that they totally just made up. And it's obvious, and it's why progressive churches are dying out, because they don't preach anything of substance. They have this very profound agnosticism to anything supernatural. if you talk to progressive pastors and progressive seminary professors long enough, if you really push them on questions like I did, you will find that they are actual atheists. I am not just using that as like some sort of insult. Like, they do not believe in God. And a lot of them used to when they first went into seminary, but then seminary professors who are also, cultural Marxists, tried their absolute hardest to convince them that the stories in the Bible are not true. And there are a lot of seminary professors who make it their goal to tear apart the faiths of students, and I cannot think of anything more wicked than that. But it's what they do, and it is actually very disturbingly common. And this does exist in the Catholic Church too, for those of you who are about to spam comment, "This is the fruits of Protestantism. Martin Luther said the Pope shouldn't tell people to buy their way out of hell, and that led to Drag Queen Story Hour." No, that Martin Luther did not cause this. Liberation theology, which is a lot of this critical theory applied to Christianity, comes from a Catholic priest in Peru. And I'm not saying it's Catholics' fault either. I'm saying that liberalism affects all of Christianity, whether Protestant or Catholic. And even Jay Dyer, who is like one of the strongest Orthodox apologists, admits that liberalism exists in Protestantism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy. It's everywhere. And I appreciate his honesty on that. So liberalism is a problem wherever you go, because cultural Marxism is meant to deconstruct the West. So yes, cultural Marxism applies to art by promoting modern art. It applies to religion by making it completely meaningless and only just metaphors for social justice. And it applies to gender by deconstructing the definition of male and female, of man and woman. You'll notice that's why, like Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman? It was very culturally useful because it really exposed the truth that they actually cannot define what a woman is. And that's not a bug, it's a feature. According to cultural Marxism, you're not supposed to try and define it. In the documentary, one of the liberal gender studies professors got mad at Matt Walsh for asking him for like a gender essentialist view of gender, which means asking him for an actual answer as to what is a woman. So that is what the purpose of all of this is, and I think Matt Walsh did a good job of exposing it. Now, I'm not saying that conservative political commentary is always good. I think it's often rage bait, but What is a Woman? I think that was a very culturally important documentary for all of us. So there was that. So cultural Marxism deconstructs gender and the family and sexuality. It does not prescribe any positively good sexual ethic or gender ethic. It just deconstructs traditional things. And I began learning about people like Judith Butler and Michel Foucault, who basically say that objective truth does not exist, and that the only real truth is fighting oppression, which basically means sleeping around as much as possible to challenge traditional Western Christian ideas of what sexuality should be about. They think truth is oppressive, and that's why during the BLM riots, during the whole BLM movement in 2020, you saw things that made sense. It's good to expose acts of racism where they do exist, but they were saying things like math is racist, and that's not just a myth that conservative reactionaries made up. In certain states like Oregon, they were actually suspending advanced math curriculums in schools because they say that traditional math is racist. And why would they possibly think that? I mean, it's absurd, but it's not like there's nothing behind it. There is something behind it. It's cultural Marxism. According to cultural Marxism, there is no objective truth, because they recognize that objective truth can only really exist with God, and they believe there is no God, so therefore there's no objective truth. There's only your truth and my truth. So therefore, any claim to objective truth, whether it's about art, or music, or gender, or math, is a form of oppression. They claim that the only real truth there is basically social justice, and it's completely self-contradictory. But aside from that, any claim to truth that people make is really just a power grab. That is not simply what woke teenage girls post on their Instagram, even though that is what woke teenage girls post on their Instagram. That is rooted in those postmodern liberal philosophers. I mean, I'm using the word liberal wrongly, just as a synonym for leftist in the context of this video. I know they're not the same, but, I'm not a political philosopher. I'm a theology nerd. So this is not my area of expertise, so you have to show me some grace for that. But you guys know what I mean. This is all very intentional. And for the longest time, when I tried to, like, tell, you know, older people about this, like, boomers, they're like, oh, this is just kids being kids. They'll grow out of it. It's just a phase. I think boomers do not grasp the reality of how much our culture has decayed. It's like, okay, boomers, just because you were a bunch of drunk, degenerate idiots when you were young and you grew out of it, doesn't mean our generation will grow out of it. Boomers have this mindset of everything will be fine in the end, because everything sort of was fine in the end for their generation. But for us in the Zoomer generation, it's really not. So, those are the 4 stages in which I converted away from progressivism and into conservatism. So the first wave was just, you know, a dissatisfaction with wokeness and SJW stuff. Nothing really substantive. My second stage of becoming conservative was just, you know, political Ben Shapiro type conservatism. Basically just generic republicanism. My third stage in being conservative was accepting the general evangelical social teaching about homosexuality, abortion, and some other things. And the fourth wave was me becoming red-pilled about cultural Marxism and the profound ways in which our culture has been hijacked. And it was from there that I developed the idea of Reconquista. I heard this really important, you know, conversation between Elisa Childers, who has a YouTube channel about progressive Christianity. She mostly focuses on progressive Christianity in evangelical context, less so in the mainline. And there was this one guest on her show, I'm forgetting who it even was, but he made a very good point that has stuck with me for years. It's that progressives never build any strong institutions. They didn't build Harvard or Yale or Princeton. Those were started by Bible-believing Christians. All they do is hijack things. And that made me realize we need to take back what they have hijacked from us. So guys, that's about the end of this video. I'm going to speed this up while I keep doing some work, and I will see you guys later.